Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to be talking about the Aurorus Audio Borealis. This is a over-ear open-back dynamic driver headphone that comes in right at around $900, and this is something that's been making waves in a lot of core audiophile communities. The guys who make this, they've been putting a lot of time and effort into tuning this headphone, and now that it's finally out in the wild, we can take a look. Alright, so just like with my other reviews, we'll be talking about build quality, design, and comfort. We'll talk about detail retrieval, speed and dynamics, soundstage imaging, and timbre. We'll talk about the frequency response and tonality, give a couple comparisons, and then ultimately decide whether or not it's worth it. Of course, if you guys want to take a closer look at some of the measurements that we've done of the Borealis on the Gross standardized measurement rig, the 43AG, I've posted my full written review of this headphone up on headphones.com already, and I'll leave a link in the description for that. But anyways, let's dive right in and talk about the build, design, and comfort, because this looks a little bit ridiculous. Now, for the build, this is about as boutique as it gets. This is a completely open design here, and actually it's basically just a driver inside a shell here, and so there's no grill on the outside or anything like that. And then on top of it, you get this seat belt for the headband, which is pretty important because you got to stay safe when you're listening to headphones, because you never know when you are going to spontaneously fly off into the ether. With the build quality, I think that's the biggest hurdle that you have to get over, because this doesn't look as premium as some of its competitors do. But remember that this is something that's built by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and it really prioritizes sound quality over, the sleek designs that we may enjoy. When it comes to comfort, the Borealis is a little bit on the heavy side for a dynamic driver headphone, but it's nothing like those higher end, Odyssey planars that are like 600 or 700 grams. This is nothing like that. This is a little bit more modest. And I do find that the comfort is reasonable over time. I was able to, get a good, 4 or 5 hours before it starts to weigh down a little bit. Weirdly, the cups over, again, maybe a couple of hours, they kind of tend to just sag a little bit on the side of my head, after a while. Again, not a huge deal breaker, but it's just something to notice. And so while the Borealis might look like a headphone that only its mother could love, it's certainly recognizable, and potentially for all the wrong reasons. It's a headphone that I have no problem wearing for long periods of time, and it is reasonably comfortable. Now let's talk about technical performance, and before going any further, I do have to stress that the Borealis is a $900 headphone that, in my opinion, for some of its aspects, competes at a much higher price tag. And the question really is, kind of where does it stop? Where's the limit for its technical aspects? I'm going to say right now, for detail retrieval, the limit, I think, is both the ZMFO Tour and the Focal Clear. And yes, I'm aware, those are headphones that cost quite a bit more than the Borealis. In my mind, the Borealis comes in just shy of the Focal Clear and ZMFO Tour for detail retrieval. And I know that's a little bit controversial, but I think it's only because it cheats at detail retrieval a little bit, and it gives a enhanced perception of detail through its other aspects, which we'll talk about next. So specifically, its instrument separation is one of the best that I've ever heard for a dynamic driver headphone. It's almost planar-like in that sense. So really, for instrument separation, the Borealis is so good that I think it imparts an extra sense of detail, because you're able to really look at all the details for all of your music a little bit better than you can with other headphones that maybe kind of blend together a little bit more. Now, for speed and dynamics, this is a very fast and tight and well-controlled headphone, but importantly, it's also a very punchy and highly dynamic headphone. Now, again, it's interesting comparing the Borealis with the Focal Clear here, because I find the Focal Clear to be a little bit more impactful, with a little bit more tone to the impact, whereas the Borealis is a little bit more thuddy and thumpy in the mid bass and below. And I think it's just because the Clear has a little bit more body there, and the frequency response above 120 hertz. But the bottom line is that at this higher price tag for dynamic driver headphones, the Borealis absolutely competes for dynamics in that sense of punch and impact. I love that quality. For soundstage and imaging, once again, the instrument separation here is fantastic. It's superb. But the soundstage isn't the widest. It's a little bit larger than that of the Focal Clear, but not by much. And I do find that the center image is a little bit pulled towards me, but it's not anything where I think it's a drawback or a shortcoming. It does sound as open as it is, though, so that is quite nice. And the imaging, apart from the center image being a little bit more towards me, I think is also excellent on this headphone. You don't have any weird sort of 3-blob issues like you do with some of the Sennheiser stuff, or, the crossover isn't like immediate like it is on some planar magnetic headphones. It's a little bit more even for the distribution of images across the front of the stage as well, so that's really good. Now for timbre, I find that this is actually the most controversial subject with the Borealis because I actually find that this is its biggest limitation at its price point. I think for all of the benefits in the frequency response that we'll talk about, I was kind of hoping that the timbre would be better. But to be a little bit more specific about that, it sounds as if in the bass, everything is just pulled too tightly. Everything is too taut. And that has this weird kind of dryness effect to it. That, again, when I was comparing back and forth with the Focal Clear, in spite of the fact that the Clear is not the most natural sounding headphone for its timbre either, I actually did find that I preferred the sense of timbre there, the sense of naturalness for the bass. And then again, for much of the rest of the frequency response, it has that same kind of almost pulled too tight character to it that gives that extra sense of dryness to it. Now at the same time, I would place this a little bit ahead of a lot of planar magnetic headphones that also have a kind of dryness to them, or a naturalness to them. So it's not as poor in timbre as many planar magnetic headphones. It's worth analyzing timbre both in terms of frequency response related timbre and also material related timbre, where I think for the Borealis its limitation is more in the material related timbre, not so much the frequency response, which we will talk about next. So put the graphs up on the screen here for you guys. Again, this is done on the Gross 43AG standardized measurement rig, and if you guys want to take a closer look at them, I have published them already on headphones.com. You can find the link in the description for that. But in general, the Borealis's frequency response is excellent. You can see that there's an appropriate rise there for the Harman shelf, which is the target that we have here from 2013. And this means that the bass is incredibly distinct from the mid-range and the rest of the frequency response. And this means that in your music, you get a really good sense of, the bass coming through. It's not as crazy well extended as some planars, but it's definitely got good bass extension and lots of bass presence. I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed by the bass of this headphone. The one thing to note here, though, is that compared to the Focal Clear, I find the Focal Clear has a little bit better body and tone to the bass presentation, whereas, again, the Borealis is a little bit more mid-bass focused there. And then for the mids, they're generally okay, except there is a bit of an elevation there at 1.5 kHz. This is a little bit on the forward side for my taste, and I do notice it in a number of recordings, but I think it's not the end of the world here. But there is a bit of an issue there around 5 kHz once you get into the treble, where there's a little bit of a peak there, a little bit of a forwardness. This does cause some percussion compression issues on some recordings. Again, it's on the right side of this for like 98% of my music, so it's not a huge deal breaker either. And then for the rest of the frequency response in the treble, this is fantastic. There's no sibilant issues. That 9 kHz dip that you see there, that should be there. That's the contra interaction, so don't worry about that, and don't EQ it up if you're going to EQ. But this surprisingly follows the frequency response in the treble very closely to that of the Focal Utopia. In fact, this is a very similar tuned headphone to the Focal Utopia. The Utopia doesn't have that 5 kHz peak that the Borealis does. But apart from that, in the rest of the treble, it's a surprisingly close frequency response with the Focal Utopia. And in some ways, I think that's a fantastic achievement. But let's do a few comparisons. Again, I've been talking about the Focal Clear for the majority of this video, and that's just because I've been going back and forth between these two for the better part of a week. And my conclusion is that where the Borealis's price to performance value ratio stops is right behind the Focal Clear. I find the Clear is a bit more detailed than the Borealis. I think the Focal Clear's frequency response for my preferences is a little bit better in the bass and in the mids, but the Borealis has a better presentation there for the treble above the 5.5 kHz peak there. So the Clear has a bit of a weird peak issue there at around 6 kHz, and the Borealis does not. So really, I think they kind of trade blows there there for the frequency response. For soundstage, the Borealis is a little bit larger and more spacious than the Clear, but not by much. And then for the punch and slam, they're very close, but I find, again, the Clear has a bit more body and impact to its punch, but the Borealis is a bit tighter and more defined and more snappy to its punch. So I think that's kind of the trade-off there, and I think this is, again, largely just due to the frequency response and then where the bass elevation is for the Borealis. The other headphone that I think it's worth comparing it to is the ZMFO Tour. Now, unfortunately, I don't have one here, but I used to own one, actually, so I've got a pretty good sense of that one. So this is from memory. The ZMFO Tour has a much more spacious soundstage to it, larger presentation, and a better timbre. Its frequency response is also quite agreeable. So they both, I think, are quite good in as far as frequency response goes. But I do also think that the ZMFO Tour may be slightly better at detail retrieval. Again, the Borealis may do a better sense of image separation and distinction than the Tour. And I think weirdly, I actually think the Borealis is also faster. But apart from that, I think they do trade blows. And keep in mind that that's fantastic because this is quite a bit less expensive than those headphones that I'm comparing it to. And then lastly, I'm going to do a completely unfair comparison here and compare it to the Focal Utopia, which, once again, we've seen that the frequency response is very similar between the two, apart from the 5 kHz peak on the Borealis. But the main difference there with the Utopia, apart from that, is that it has better detail retrieval, noticeably better detail retrieval. Again, where I think the limitation is when it comes to detail, and I do think that the Utopia's detail retrieval is just categorically superior, and it's much more worthy of the flagship price tag that it has. But it's surprising how well the Borealis does for its tonality and frequency response, and how that contributes to overall enjoyment and how good something sounds. So in many ways, that's what the Borealis is doing. It's a testament to what's possible when you pay very close attention to carefully tuning the headphone and making sure that it follows a curve that is really agreeable, because that's kind of what they've done with this headphone. Anyways, let me give a conclusion here. I think the Borealis has several things working against it. The first is that the styling and the build, it looks very boutique, and it is. If you can get over that, then I think suddenly the price to performance ratio for this headphone is pretty darn incredible. And the other key drawback with this headphone is availability. At the time of recording this, I'm actually not sure if this is available to purchase right now, but hopefully in the future when you guys are watching this, it will be. And hopefully they'll be ramping up production so the more people can actually buy this. But if you can look past those issues and maybe you have a way to get one of these, I do think this is a fantastic sounding headphone. For all of the technical aspects and the frequency response, everything that this headphone does, it demonstrates that they've prioritized sound quality over all the rest of the stuff that's involved with headphones. And in this case, I think it's resulted in something that's really quite excellent. So yes, I do recommend the Aurorus Audio Borealis if you can find one. And I do think it competes at a much higher price tag than the $900 that it comes in at. And in many ways, this is just a testament to what's possible when you have enthusiasts making headphones for enthusiasts. It might not be the absolute best at one thing, but for just about all categories, I think it does really, really well. And so that is something where I think if you just sort of take a step back and you think, okay, what's overall enjoyment? This does really, really well in that regard. Anyways, that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.